3 days before my son's wedding. I drove to Hargrove Jewelers on Elm Street to pick up the pearl earrings I'd had resized. The woman behind the counter, Dorothy Chen, had been sizing jewelry for our family for over 20 years. She'd fitted my wedding ring in 1984. She'd helped my son pick out his first girlfriend's bracelet when he was 16. When I walked through the door, Dorothy looked up from behind the glass case. Her face changed. Not the usual warmth. Something tighter. Something afraid. Margaret. She came around the counter faster than I'd ever seen her move. 63 years old, small and precise, and she was practically running. She took my elbow without a word and steered me toward the back of the shop, past the display cases, through a door marked Staff Only. Dorothy? What on earth? Shh. She pressed her finger to her lips and pointed at the wall. Then she turned off the small lamp on the work table. We stood in the dark. I heard voices from the adjoining room. Her back office shared a wall with the private consultation room she rented to other vendors on weekends. A man's voice first. Calm. Rehearsed. The trust amendment is already drafted. She signed Saturday evening at the reception. After the first dance, she won't read it. She never reads anything longer than a page. My breath stopped. A woman's voice next. Younger. Hesitant. My son's fiancée, Diane. And if she asks questions, she won't. Nathan will handle her. That's what he's there for. Nathan, my son. The deed transfer alone is $1.4 million, the man continued. The investment accounts are another $800,000. Combined with the Hartwell property she inherited from her sister, we're looking at just over $2.6 million total. A third voice, older, clinical, measured. The cognitive assessment is already on file. I've documented 4 incidents over the past 2 months. Once I submit the formal determination, the guardianship petition can be filed Monday. The court typically moves within 72 hours. I knew that voice. Dr. Raymond Foss, my physician of 6 years. The man who had called me sharp as a tack at my last checkup in March. Dorothy's hand found mine in the dark. Her fingers were cold. I bit down on the inside of my cheek. I stood very still and I listened to 3 people plan how to take everything I had ever built. And I did not make a sound. Chairs scraped. Footsteps moved toward the far door. A latch clicked. Silence. Dorothy turned the lamp back on. Her eyes were wet. They were here last Sunday, she whispered. Same room, same conversation. I didn't know if I should call you. I didn't know if you'd believe me. I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had known me longer than most people in this city, who had resized my ring after my husband passed and never once charged me for it. My earrings, I said. Are they ready? She blinked. Then she went to the drawer and came back with a small velvet box. I took it, dropped it in my purse, and walked back through the shop. The afternoon sun on Elm Street was ordinary and indifferent. Couples walked past. A man was eating a sandwich on a bench. A woman pushed a stroller. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, not moving. Then I got in my car, closed the door, and sat. $2.6 million. My house, my accounts. The Hartwell property my sister Eleanor left me when she died 2 years ago. The piece of land she'd spent 30 years paying off. The only thing she'd ever really owned. And my son was in that room. Not asking questions, not objecting, handling me. I didn't start the engine. I didn't cry. I pressed my hands flat on my steering wheel, and I let the truth arrive fully, the way you have to let cold water arrive, all at once, without flinching. My name is Margaret Opal Whitfield. I am 67 years old. I was a high school history teacher for 26 years. After my husband Robert died in 2011, I took early retirement and spent 4 years converting the Hartwell land my sister had left me into a working bed and breakfast. Whitfield House. 8 rooms, a wraparound porch, and a view of the Blue Ridge Mountains that made guests cry on their first morning. I ran it alone for 9 years. No investors, no partners, no loans, After the first one was paid off in 2019, Nathan was 28 when Robert died. He took his father's death hard. We both did. But where I turned the grief into something, Nathan spent 3 years drifting, different cities, short-term jobs, a lease he broke after 6 months in Denver, another in Portland. I wired him money twice and told him it was a loan. We never spoke of repayment. In 2021, he came home. He was steadier. He'd met someone, Diane Prescott, 31, graphic designer, from Richmond. She had a light, easy smile and a habit of touching Nathan's arm whenever she spoke. He seemed calmer around her. I was glad. By Christmas 2022, they were engaged. I hosted the dinner. I made Robert's mother's pot roast and opened a bottle of wine we'd been saving since 2008. That night, I sat on the porch after they left and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not quite happy, but close. I should have paid more attention to when it changed. It started small, the way it always does, I know now. Late 2023, Nathan came to visit without Diane for once and spent most of the afternoon talking about my retirement plan. Had I thought about stepping back from Whitfield House? Had I considered that running a property alone at my age was a liability? What if something happened? A fall? A health issue? Who would manage the business? I told him I was fine. I ran 3 miles twice a week. My blood pressure was better than his. He nodded and dropped it. But he brought it up again in February, then again in March. In April, I forgot a reservation. A couple from Charlotte arrived on a Friday evening and I had no record of their booking. I apologized, gave them the best room at no charge, fed them breakfast twice. It was a mistake, a calendar error. My assistant Carol had entered it on the wrong week, but Nathan heard about it and his voice on the phone that evening was careful in a way that made me uneasy. "Mom, that's not like you." "I told you Carol made the error." "I know. I'm just saying, running a business alone is a lot. You don't have to prove anything." I told him I wasn't proving anything. I was running my business. After that, I noticed things. The way Diane steered conversations at Sunday dinners when I said something strong. A small redirection. A gentle interruption. The way Nathan would glance at her before answering certain questions. The way Dr. Foss at my April appointment asked twice whether I was sleeping well, whether I'd had any episodes of confusion, whether I considered reducing my stress load. I thought I was imagining it. I told myself they were worried. I told myself that's what family does. I sat in my car on Elm Street and understood that I hadn't been imagining anything at all. I started the engine and drove home. Whitfield House sat at the end of a gravel lane, backed against the tree line, the Blue Ridge visible through the back windows on clear days. Robert had driven up this lane for the first time in 1997 and said it looked like a painting that hadn't been finished yet. I let myself in and stood in the front hall for a moment. Then I walked to my desk and opened my laptop. I didn't search elder financial abuse right away. I searched the name first, Raymond Fossey, board certifications, reviews, history. 40 minutes later, I had enough to feel sick. I found a complaint, filed with the Virginia Medical Board in 2019. Dr. Foss had submitted a cognitive assessment on a 71-year-old male patient, a retired architect named Howard Greer. The assessment had been used to support a guardianship filing by Howard's daughter. Howard Greer had contested it. His attorney had obtained an independent evaluation from a neurologist at UVA. The independent evaluation found no evidence of cognitive impairment. The medical board complaint had been closed without action 6 months later. Howard Greer died in 2021. The daughter had sold his townhouse in Charlottesville by then. I sat back in my chair. My phone was ringing. Nathan. I let it ring. At 7 o'clock, I called Patricia Halloran. Patricia had been my closest friend since we taught at Richwood High together in the 90s. She'd retired 3 years before me, moved to Staunton, and spent her time doing exactly what she'd always said she would, painting watercolors and minding her own business. She was also the most clear-headed person I had ever known in my life. She answered on the second ring. "I need to talk to you," I said. Tonight, not on the phone. She drove the 40 minutes without asking any questions. I told her everything in the kitchen over a pot of tea. The jeweler's back room. The voices through the wall. Nathan's name in the middle of it. Dr. Foss. The trust amendment. The $2.6 million. The Monday guardianship petition. Patricia listened without speaking. When I finished, she set down her cup. Do you have a lawyer? James Whittaker. He handled Robert's estate. Call him first thing tomorrow. Tonight. Write down everything you heard. Every word. Exact. With the time. She paused. And Margaret, don't tell Nathan. I know. Not a word. Not a look. Not a single thing different. She reached across and put her hand over mine. You have 3 days. Use them. I wrote down everything that night. 4 pages, handwritten, dated, timed. Then I called the number Dorothy Chen had texted me before I left the shop. She'd written one line beneath it. He helped my cousin. He's honest. His name was Vincent Arquette. He'd spent 19 years as a financial crimes investigator before going private. He answered at 9:30, his voice unhurried, like a man who had taken worse calls at worse hours. I told him what I needed. How much time? He asked. 3 days. A pause. I'll need access to financial records, background on the fiancée and her associates, and anything you have on the doctor. I told him about Howard Greer. Another pause. Longer this time. I'll call you tomorrow at noon. He called at 11:40. Meet me tonight, he said. Bring your lawyer, if you can reach him. James Whittaker met us at his office at 6. He was 68, semi-retired, and had written Robert's will in the same building in 2008. He'd been practicing long enough not to look surprised at much. Vincent Arquette sat across from us. Late 50s, graying at the temples, with the kind of stillness that came from spending 2 decades watching people lie. He opened a manila folder and laid 3 documents on the desk. Diane Prescott, he said, incorporated a company called Prescott Asset Consulting LLC in Delaware in January of this year. The other named partner is a man named Gregory Hale. He slid a photograph across the desk. Gregory Hale is Diane's former business partner from a failed real estate venture in Richmond in 2020. That venture was the subject of a civil fraud complaint filed by 2 investors. The complaint was settled quietly. Hale received nothing at settlement. Prescott Asset Consulting was incorporated 11 days later. James leaned forward. The company has no clients on record. Vincent continued. It has 1 bank account. That account received a wire transfer of $40,000 in February and another $60,000 in March. He looked at me. The source account for both transfers belongs to Dr. Raymond Fossey. The room was quiet. The March transfer was 2 weeks after your April appointment, he said. My April appointment was in March, I said. He rescheduled. Yes, and the day after that appointment, he filed a preliminary notation in your medical record. Not a formal assessment. A notation. Quote, patient demonstrates mild short-term memory irregularities consistent with early-stage cognitive decline. Recommend monitoring and follow-up assessment. He entered it the next day. I stared at the document he slid toward me. My name at the top. Raymond Fossey's signature at the bottom. I told him about the reservation error, I said. He asked me to describe it. I thought he was being thorough. He was building a record, James said quietly. Vincent moved to the second document. Gregory Hale has a contact in the Shenandoah Valley, a property developer named Carson Briggs. Briggs has been attempting to acquire properties along Route 340 for the past 18 months. The Hartwell land borders his existing holdings. It has been appraised privately at $1.1 million. If he acquires it through a forced sale following a guardianship declaration, his offer on record is $680,000. I thought about my sister Eleanor. 30 years of payments. Every birthday she ever worked through. Every vacation she never took. The trust amendment, James said. Do you have a copy? Not yet, Vincent said, but we don't need one. Margaret, we need to file an emergency motion to prevent the execution of any document signed under duress or without independent legal counsel present. I can have it ready by Friday afternoon. What about the guardianship petition? It can't be filed without the formal cognitive assessment. Fossey hasn't filed it yet. If we move first with an independent neurological evaluation, which I've already arranged for Thursday morning at UVA, we can establish a clean record before he files anything. James folded his hands, and with Fossey's financial relationship to Prescott Consulting on record, any assessment he submits becomes immediately suspect. I looked at Vincent. And Nathan? He met my eyes. Your son knew about the trust amendment. He knew about the plan to have you sign documents at the reception. Whether he understood the full scope, the guardianship, the doctor, the property transfer, I can't say yet. What's your read? He was quiet for a moment. He's not a criminal, but he let himself be used. Those aren't the same thing, but they're also not entirely different. I drove home in the dark. The mountains were invisible behind the clouds. The lane to Whitfield House was lit by 2 old lanterns. I'd installed the year we opened. I sat in the car for a while before going in. Robert had always said I was the one who ran toward problems. He'd said it like a compliment mostly, but sometimes like a warning. Nathan was my son. He was also the boy who had drifted for 3 years after losing his father. He was also the man sitting in a private consultation room agreeing to hand his mother's life over to people who needed her money more than they needed her. I went inside and sat in the chair by the window where I always sat when I couldn't sleep. I thought about the 4 things I needed to do in the next 60 hours and I put them in order. I didn't sleep much, but I slept. Thursday went the way it needed to go. The neurologist at UVA, Dr. Sandra Kwan, was 50, precise, and unhurried. She ran a full evaluation over 2 hours. At the end, she shook my hand and said she would have the written report by Friday morning. You're not showing any indicators, she said plainly. Your executive function scores are in the 90th percentile for your age group. I thanked her and drove back. That evening, Vincent called. He had found Howard Greer's daughter. Her name was Sylvia Greer Thornton. She lived in Roanoke. She had spent the better part of 2019 and 2020 fighting a guardianship filing that had ultimately succeeded. Howard Greer had been moved to a memory care facility in 2020. He had died 14 months later. Sylvia had contested the estate sale of the Charlottesville townhouse in court and lost. She'll speak on your behalf, Vince said. Video testimony. She's been waiting for someone to ask. Did she know it was Foss? She did. She filed the medical board complaint herself. She told me she has the original letter they sent her. Insufficient evidence to warrant further action. She's kept it in a drawer for 3 years. On Friday morning, the UVA report arrived. No evidence of cognitive impairment, memory, attention, and executive function within normal to superior range. Patient demonstrates strong verbal reasoning and intact organizational capacity. No clinical basis for concerns regarding decision-making competency. James filed the emergency motion at 2 in the afternoon. That evening, Patricia came back. We sat on the porch as the light went behind the mountains. She brought a peach pie she'd made the night before, and neither of us ate much of it. Have you decided? She asked. Yes. And Nathan? I watched the tree line for a while. Rosa told me something once, I said. I stopped. That was someone else's story. My housekeeper here, Carol, heard them talking in my driveway 2 Sundays ago. Nathan said to Diane, I don't want to do it this way. She said, it's already done. You already signed the LLC documents. He didn't say anything after that. Patricia was quiet. He knew enough to sign, I said, and not enough to stop. What are you going to do with that? I didn't answer. Not yet. The wedding rehearsal dinner was held at Carrington Hall, a restored farmhouse outside of town that Diane had chosen because it had what she called the right aesthetic. Round tables, ivory linens, a string quartet in the corner. I wore a blue dress I had bought in 2019 for Eleanor's birthday dinner, the last one she ever had. I don't know why I chose it. Maybe I wanted her there. Nathan was warm all evening, attentive. He refilled my water glass twice, without being asked, and put his hand briefly on my shoulder when he passed behind me. I smiled at him. I said, "I'm so glad you found her." Across the table, Diane lifted her glass and said, "We're so happy you're here, Margaret." I lifted mine back. Gregory Hale was at the bar when I walked past at 8:30. I recognized him from Vincent's photograph. Heavy-set, early 40s, a sport coat that looked newly purchased. He was watching Nathan with a measuring kind of attention. He didn't look at me twice. He didn't know that I looked at him 3 times before I ever walked into the room. I went home at 9:30, said I was tired. Carol was waiting in the kitchen with tea. She was 60 herself, broad-shouldered and quiet, and she had worked at Whitfield House since the 2nd year. I sat at the table and said, "Tell me what you heard that Sunday." She wrapped both hands around her mug. Nathan said he wasn't sure it was the right move. She said that it was already too late, that the documents were filed. Carol paused, and then she said, "Your mother will be fine. She'll just have less to worry about." And Nathan said, "She's not going to see it that way." And Diane said, "She won't be in a position to argue." I looked at the table. The wood Robert and I had found at an estate sale in 1999 and refinished ourselves over 3 weekends. She won't be in a position to argue. "Thank you," I said. "You told me exactly when I needed to know." The wedding was at 4 on Saturday at a small chapel on the edge of town. I sat in the front row and watched my son walk to the altar. He looked like his father from the back, the same way of holding his shoulders. The ceremony was short and simple. When the officiant asked who supported this union, I said what I was supposed to say. The reception at Whitfield House began at 6. I had insisted on the venue. Nathan had suggested a hotel. I said it was my home and my gift, and that was that. 200 white lights were strung along the porch. The tables were set up on the back lawn with the mountains behind them. A local band played softly near the hedgerow. It was a beautiful evening. It was genuinely, honestly beautiful, and some part of me held that and grieved it at the same time. James Whitaker arrived at 6:15 dressed as a guest, which he was, because I had invited him. He sat at table 7. Vincent Arquette was at table 9, introduced to everyone as a former colleague of Robert's. 2 contacts of his, plainclothes, both former law enforcement, were at the bar and near the garden entrance. At 7, Gregory Hale approached me near the dessert table. "Mrs. Whitfield, I'm Gregory, a friend of Diane's. Wonderful evening." "It is," I said. "The mountains are best in this light." "Absolutely," he smiled. "I believe we may have some business to discuss at some point. Diane mentioned you might be considering some estate planning." "She mentioned that?" "Just in passing. Nothing formal." "Whenever you're ready." "Of course," I said. "Let's enjoy the evening first." He nodded and moved on. At 7:45, Nathan found me standing near the oak tree at the edge of the property. He put his arm around my shoulders. "You all right, Mom?" "Perfectly fine. You seem far away." "I'm right here." I looked at him, his face in the evening light, Robert's jaw, and my father's eyes. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth." He stiffened slightly. Just slightly. "Did you know about the trust amendment before tonight?" A pause. 2 seconds, maybe 3. "Diane said it was standard estate planning, that it would protect you if—" "Did you know about Dr. Fossey?" The pause was longer this time. "Nathan. She said he was worried about you." His voice had gone careful. "She said he'd noticed things." "I thought—" He stopped. "What did you think?" "I thought maybe she was right." He looked at the ground. "After Dad, you worked so hard. You never stopped, and I thought maybe you were tired and you wouldn't admit it. Have you ever seen me be confused? Forget something important? Say the wrong thing at the wrong time?" He was quiet. "Once," he finally said. "The reservation. Carol made that error." "You knew that?" He didn't answer. Nathan. I turned to face him. I need you to hear me say this clearly. I am not declining. I am not in need of protection. And the people who convinced you I was, they didn't do it because they were worried about me. He looked at me then, something moving in his face. Not quite shame, not quite surprise, something between them. What are you going to do? He said softly. What I've always done, I said. Handle it. At 8 o'clock, the band finished a set and the MC stepped to the microphone. We'd love to invite Margaret Whitfield, mother of the groom, to say a few words. I walked to the microphone. I looked out at the tables. 200 lights in the trees. Neighbors, friends, people who had known Robert, guests who had stayed at Whitfield House and come back for this. Sylvia Greer Thornton, Howard's daughter, was at table 11. She had driven from Roanoke that afternoon. I had called her Thursday night. She'd said yes before I finished asking. I set my written remarks on the podium, and I did not look at them once. Good evening, everyone. 31 years ago, I stood in a hospital room and held my son for the first time. He weighed 8 pounds even. He had his father's scowl and what looked like an opinion about everything already. The doctor said he was healthy. I thought he was the most terrifying and wonderful thing I had ever seen. Soft laughter. I watched Nathan watching me from his table. His new wife's hand in his. Her face composed. He grew up in this house. He learned to drive on that gravel lane out front. He came home here after his father died and sat on the back porch for 3 days, not saying much. And I sat beside him and didn't say much either. And that was enough. I paused. Marriage, I said, is the choice to show someone all of what you are, not the version that presents well. The full thing. The tables were quiet. I've spent the last 26 years of my life being truthful. As a teacher, truth was the only currency I had. As a widow, truth was sometimes the only thing standing between me and giving up. As a woman running a business alone at 67, I paused. Truth is the reason I'm still standing. I looked at the crowd. So tonight I'd like to be truthful about something. The mood shifted, subtly. I watched it move across the tables the way weather moves across the mountains behind us. This property, Whitfield House, was built by my husband and myself over 9 years. The land it sits on was my sister Eleanor's life's work. She died 2 years ago, and she left it to me because she trusted me. It represents $2.6 million in real assets. And this week, I discovered that 3 people had formed a plan to take it from me. The silence was complete, not through force, through paperwork, through a trust amendment I was meant to sign tonight, at this reception after the first dance, that would transfer control of everything I owned to a new LLC incorporated for that purpose. I looked at Gregory Hale. He had gone very still at his table, through a fraudulent cognitive assessment prepared by my physician of 6 years, who received a combined $100,000 in payments from that same LLC before the ink was dry on my medical record. I clicked the small remote in my hand. The screen on the side of the house where we normally showed a photo slideshow at events came to life. A bank statement. Dr. Raymond Fossey's name at the top. 2 wire transfers. The receiving account, Prescott Asset Consulting, LLC. Gasps. Someone stood up. Several people turned toward Dr. South. Fossey at table 12. Dr. Fossey looked at the screen. He looked at me. He stood and moved toward the garden exit. Vincent's contact stepped in front of him quietly and said something in a low voice. Dr. Foss stopped. I turned back to the microphone. This is not a story about betrayal, I said. Or rather, it's not only that. The screen changed. Howard Greer's name, his photograph, a kind-faced man in front of a brick townhouse. Howard Greer was 71 years old when the same physician filed a cognitive assessment that was used to remove his control over his own life. He was moved to a memory care facility. He died 14 months later. His daughter Sylvia has been carrying the weight of what happened to him for 3 years. I looked toward table 11. Sylvia was sitting very straight, her hands folded on the table, her eyes steady. Sylvia, I said. Thank you for driving here tonight. She nodded. I want to introduce you to someone else. The screen changed again. A woman's face on a live video feed. She was in her late 70s, sitting in a well-lit room with a quilt behind her. My name is Ruth Abernathy, she said. She was from Harrisonburg. Her voice was steady and slow. In 2021, my doctor submitted a report saying I was cognitively declining. I was not. My son had hired him. I lost my home of 38 years. I have never fully recovered what was taken from me. She looked into the camera. Margaret Whitfield. I'm glad someone finally caught them in time. The feed ended. The lawn was very quiet. Gregory Hales stood. He said something to the person beside him and moved toward the back exit. Vincent stepped out of the shadows near the hedgerow. Mr. Hale, I said into the microphone, not loudly, just clearly, please sit down. He looked at me from across the lawn. Then he sat. I looked at my watch. 8:57. The trust amendment is automated to execute at 9 o'clock. In 3 minutes, the full $2.6 million in assets would transfer into Prescott Consulting's accounts. From there to Cayman routing by morning. I looked at James. He stood from table 7 and addressed the guests. My name is James Whitaker. I'm a practicing attorney in this county. As of 2 o'clock this afternoon, an emergency protective injunction has been filed with the Shenandoah Valley Circuit Court, freezing all asset transfers from Margaret Whitfield's estate pending a fraud investigation. He held up a document. As of this moment, those accounts are locked. The screen changed one last time, a single line in plain text. Transfer blocked. Court Orn EEFF. 9 p.m. 2 men in dark jackets moved from their positions. One approached Dr. Foss. The other approached Gregory Hale. Dr. Foss. The other approached Gregory Hale. Dr. Foss did not resist. He looked only at the ground. Gregory Hale argued for approximately 10 seconds before the cuffs went on. I turned off the microphone. The lawn erupted. Not chaos exactly. More like the sound a room makes when something that has been held too tight finally lets go. I stood at the podium and waited until the noise settled, and then I stepped down. Nathan was standing 6 feet away. Not at the table anymore. He had come to stand near the front, and he was watching me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face since he was a child. Completely unguarded, Diane was already on her feet. She looked at the exits, calculating. A woman from the catering staff, who was not from the catering staff, appeared at her elbow. I watched my new daughter-in-law's face change. Nathan didn't look at her. He looked at me. "Mom," he said. His voice was very low. "I know," I said. "I didn't." He stopped. Started again. I didn't understand what it actually was. I thought it was paperwork. I thought you needed. I know what you thought. I should have asked you. Yes, I said. You should have. He sat down on the nearest chair. Not his table, just the nearest chair. He sat down like a man who had been standing for a very long time and had only just noticed. I stood in the middle of my backyard, surrounded by 200 lights and everything Robert and Eleanor and I had ever built, and I let the night settle around me. Patricia appeared at my shoulder. She handed me a glass of water and didn't say anything. That was why she was my oldest friend. The officers led Fossey and Hale through the garden gate. Diane was escorted separately, no cuffs, but firmly. She didn't look at Nathan as she passed. I didn't watch them go. I watched the mountains, which were dark now, just their outline against the sky. At midnight, I climbed the stairs. Still in my blue dress, Eleanor's birthday dress. When I reached the top, Nathan was sitting on the floor in the hallway with his back against the wall and his arms on his knees, the way he'd sat as a teenager when he was waiting to apologize for something. I sat down beside him. He didn't speak for a while. "I keep thinking about when I signed the LLC documents," he finally said. "She said it was administrative. I asked her twice, and she explained it twice, and both times it sounded reasonable. And I wanted it to sound reasonable." He looked at his hands. Reasonable. He looked at his hands. Because if it was reasonable, then I wasn't doing anything wrong. And I wanted to not be doing anything wrong. Why? He was quiet for a long time. Because I've spent 12 years feeling like I wasn't doing enough. Like I wasn't enough. Dad died and you kept going. You built something, and I drifted. He shook his head. Diane told me I could help you. That stepping in was what a good son does. And I wanted to believe that. I wanted to finally be the one helping. The hallway was quiet. You helped me best, I said. Every time you called on a Sunday evening when nothing was happening. Every time you came home and sat on the porch with me. He didn't answer. That was never nothing, I said. He covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook once, briefly. Then he pulled himself straight. I'm sorry, he said. I know that doesn't cover it. It's a start. We sat there on the hall floor in the dark. Outside, the lights were still on in the yard, and through the window at the end of the hall, I could see them blinking softly in the tree branches. After a while, I went to my room. I sat at the edge of the bed and thought about Eleanor, about the 30 years she spent on that land, about what she would have said if she were here. Probably something short and precise, because Eleanor had never used 12 words where 3 would do. Took you long enough. I smiled. Then I lay down, still in the blue dress, and slept. I won't try to make the next month sound simple. Dr. Raymond Foss's license was suspended within 3 weeks of his arrest, pending investigation. He was formally indicted in September on charges of fraud, falsification of medical records, and conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse. Ruth Abernathy and Sylvia Greer Thornton both testified. 3 additional former patients came forward after the coverage in the Valley Journal. By November, the charges numbered 7. He was sentenced to 9 years the following spring. Gregory Hale accepted a plea agreement. 4 years. Forfeiture of the Richmond property and all assets held under Prescott Consulting. Carson Briggs, the developer he'd been funneling toward the Hartwell land, was investigated separately for bid manipulation. His holdings along Route 340 were frozen pending litigation. Diane was charged with conspiracy and wire fraud. Her attorney negotiated a reduced sentence. She served 18 months. The Hartwell land is still mine. Whitfield House is still mine. Nathan and I moved more carefully after that. Not coldly. Carefully. The way you move around something you almost broke and didn't. He came home for Thanksgiving that November, alone. He helped me strip the back porch railing that had needed refinishing since the spring. We worked through most of the afternoon without talking much, and then we sat in the cold with cups of coffee and watched the light go off the mountains. He apologized again. More fully this time. He talked about the signs he'd chosen not to see, the questions he'd chosen not to ask. The version of helpfulness he'd agreed to that had nothing to do with actually helping me. I told him the truth, that I understood how it had happened. That grief does strange things to what we need to believe about ourselves. That Diane had found exactly the story he needed and handed it to him with both hands. I also told him that understanding how it happened was not the same as it not having happened. He nodded. He said he knew. We finished the coffee. In December, he called from a new number. New apartment. He'd moved back to the valley, 40 minutes from Whitfield House, took a position at an engineering firm in Staunton. We had dinner on Christmas Eve. Patricia came. Carol made pot roast. Nathan brought a bottle of wine he'd clearly thought hard about choosing. It was the first Christmas in a long time that I felt something I'd stopped expecting to feel. Not exactly peace, but its neighbor. On New Year's Day, I walked out to the back lawn alone and stood under the oak tree where Eleanor and I had stood the summer she handed me the deed to the Hartwell land. She'd been matter-of-fact about it, the way she was matter-of-fact about most things that mattered most to her. It's yours now, she'd said. Don't let anyone tell you what to do with it. I stood in the January cold, looking at the mountains. I kept it, I told her. Every bit of it. The wind moved through the branches above me. I walked back inside, poured coffee, and started planning the spring season at Whitfield House. I have learned, at 67, that the things worth keeping require the same thing, that you pay attention, that you don't let comfort tell you everything is fine when your hands are telling you something different. That the people who want you to stop asking questions are rarely asking because they're worried about you. I have learned that a son can be both a person who let you down and a person worth forgiving. That those two things don't cancel each other out. And I have learned, this took longer, that I had made my own contributions to the distance between us, that I kept going so relentlessly after Robert died, kept building, kept proving that I had left Nathan standing outside my effort without ever meaning to, that he had needed to be seen inside it, and I had been too focused on keeping it standing to notice. Diane found a crack and pried it open, but I had helped make the crack. I'm not saying that to excuse what was done. I'm saying it because it's true, and I promised myself I would keep being truthful. If you are watching this and you have built something, a business, a home, a life after loss, and you have people around you who love you, please hear me say this. The building is not the whole thing. The people watching you build need to be brought inside it sometimes. They need to know they matter more than the structure. I almost lost everything because I forgot that for too long. I didn't lose it, but it was close. Closer than anyone who had been paying attention should have allowed it to get. I'm paying attention now. Thank you for staying with me through all of it. If this story gave you something to sit with, I'd be glad to hear from you in the comments. And if it reached you at a moment when you needed it, I hope it helped.